Hi there. It's Travie. It's 11:20 a.m. in Makawao, Maui. Just had a big old storm. My gosh. And have no power. A little bit on my battery. And yeah, I thought I would just pop on as the kids do today and talk to myself and record it. Send it out for y'all to just think whatever you will. But sorry for the flickering. Still trying to figure out the virtual green screen. But hi, how is everyone? Whew. So, just thought I would consider coming on here and telling a little bit more personal story stuff. So my previous episode, which I'm going to be posting as testimony against the rezoning of condos in Ma'alaya to be hotels. I thought I'd follow up with this. I guess we're now on episode, oh gosh, 5 or 6? I think it's 6. 5? The next episode. It'll be in the title. But yeah, I'm going to tell a little bit about my story. I've touched on it like a public-facing story, but I'm going to tell more what my perspective has been. Just turned 51, finished my 51st year, and yeah, I think it's an interesting story. So I'm just going to tell a story, and I apologize to the people I've known over the last half century. I've left some stuff out. You may have a perspective on why once you hear it, but it's probably going to solve some mysteries. Like, why did that guy work at NASA? Didn't really make sense. Like, where did he come from? What are his motives? And etc. So, yeah, I am a redneck Hoosier. I'm from a rural part of Indiana, where I would guess the other rural parts make fun of for being so rural. Fairview. Between Red Key, Parker City, Ridgeville, and Albany. It wasn't incorporated, it was just an intersection. There was a bridge across the river Mississinawa and a highway, Hoover's Roost, Fairview United Methodist Church. The tractor store came in at one point. Tiny home village next door, if you know what I mean. And yeah, it popped out in 1975. And yeah, my mom says, yeah, you were different. Bless her heart, Fran. She said, you were different. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you just looked different, and I don't remember her words, but I'll tell you what I remember, which is just coming out fully baked. As in, there haven't been a lot of changes to my perception or personality since then, and I came out not speaking English, but just having a real clear idea of what was going on and being like, oh, huh, interesting. Like, people, are they going to get through that peanut butter sandwich? Sometimes they didn't. Like, all I can figure is that, you know, I've been told that I have a high IQ, but I would argue that in some areas a very low. I compensate for it, if you know what I mean. If anyone's ever been with me when I'm looking for my keys. But yeah, GATE program, whatever you want to call it, gifted and talented child, special. And by the way, there's a real thing, Mensa to unsheltered pipeline, because there is a level at which you become unemployable. But yeah, I popped out like this, and yeah, I remember acquiring language really early and having deep conversations with people like at restaurants that like weren't at our tables, and it causing a stir because people were like kind of confused because I had really advanced language I remember for that age. But I remember thinking people are confused and that is leading them to be widely unhappy. And so I remember being very entertained by everyone. If you look at baby pictures, I'm just like, what is going on? This is hilarious. But early on, I realized people are frustrated and confused. And I just made a conscious choice to like try to cheer them up. It's just my nature. Here's an example of one of the things I picked up spontaneously. Going to the Muncie Mall, like 2 years old. And I realized that people laugh when you wink at them, like really hard. And I would just lock eyes with someone and wink at them, like awkwardly to try to get a laugh out of them. But sometimes it would startle them, like, is that infant winking at me? And I would look at them like, yes, I am. What are some other things? Uncle Ralph's house in Portland, Indiana. Redneck Kennedy's he owned the TV store, and they're all the old ladies. God bless them, and they're like Sunday best at the extended family reunion. And I remember getting a lot of laughs there and just having so much fun. And there just would establish a feedback loop with the old ladies, and just we would have so much fun. And yeah, I was just so happy. We lived on a river, the Mississinawa, and it was just beautiful. Except like chocolate milk, you just knew not to swim in it because it's like confined. It's like you grow the crops, feed them to the confined feeding operation, and then put the doo-doo on the fields with like every chemical at every step of the way, as far as the eye can see. So you didn't get in the river, but just a very stimulating natural environment. My family have built their own house, devout Methodist, like wholesome wooden school. Muskrat. My first job was muskrat trapping assistant. So like the fur industry was still hanging on in parts of the world. And yeah, simple life, complex thinking, navigated the best I could. So around 2, I picked up reading. I correlated the night before Christmas to the words. Maybe it was a little bit of a parlor stunt, but like I remember being able to follow along with the words, and my mom got a kick out of it. She thought it was cool. I showed Grandma, Florence. She was not entertained. She was a devout Christian, and she looked at me as I have had other people look at me in my life. Like, what is going on here? And she was terrified that a 2.5-year-old, that was Christmas of 77. So Christmas of 77, I was born in August of 75. This person that you see here went underground, if you know what I mean. I navigated the world differently and realized the risk to being completely open with my mind. And it's been real. So as soon as I hit school, Parker City Elementary, wooden school, beautiful, elaborate, used to be the high school. As soon as I hit school, they're like, oh, we have a protocol for this. Sent me to Muncie, to university. And just remember the people being really flustered. And them telling my parents, well, he needs to be in a special school. And now we know those things might have been more complex than they seem to be on the surface. And my mom, having 3 other children, said, yeah, there's no way I'm driving a round trip to Muncie twice a day from Fairview. No. So off I went into the public school system. So kindergarten, off to a start. PM kindergarten, because by the way, I've since learned I have 6 genetic mutations. Immunocompromised, autoinflammation, dual eczema, some recessive thing that doesn't supposedly affect me but may my children, and 2 junk DNA. We're not really sure what that is. We'll get to that. So my first memory, PM kindergarten, and I got in there and I was like, what is going on? Like I'm surrounded by like mute baby dolls. And I had developed this complex language. And I was frightened of the other children. Like, they were like, I mean, I'm sure some were still nursing. They were like, nobody home. So I spent every day I would get to kindergarten. Miss Ann, are you out there? Miss Ann was a very voluptuous lady, and I would just crawl up on her lap and cry because I was scared of the other kids because they didn't know how to carry a conversation. And I was like, what is going on? It was like, I just remember thinking, okay, this is a mismatch. But yeah, I navigated that there public school system, and had a best friend in first grade. Like, later in life, he would have been the bully, I would have been the nerd. But we were like best friends, and got into all the troubles. And yeah, 1983, my muskrat trapping career really picked up. So we would go out on the river, my brother and I. Because I shared a bedroom with like the bully of the school, like in high school. But we would go out and go muskrat trapping. $10 a pelt. I would get $1. And not much talking. It was very cold. Sometimes we had to break the ice. And there is a whole strategy to it. It is not a fun job, but yeah, that was my first job, muskrat trapper's assistant. Take the $1, go to the dime store, spend the whole afternoon. But yeah, I started to get infections on my fingers because, by the way, we found out later, the effluent from the tiny home village and then all the stuff from the fields, my uncle's septic tank we found goes right into the stream where I played. And again, have all those genetic mutations, immune impairment, autoinflammation, bubble boy, no bubble, boiling blood. I mean, my analysis says that is 1 in millions, if not 10 millions, to be so lucky. And we found since I got 1 from my mom, the other 2 from my dad. We're going to confirm that, hopefully. So probably not the best thing to be like immersed in this ecosystem. I started to get infections, and it went almost to, it felt like I was scared it was going to go to the bone. Had a smell to it. I'd have to wrap my hands in gauze. Just wouldn't heal. That was like 83, 84. They couldn't keep me out of the river because, I don't know, just loved it. And yeah, then I started having these sleep disturbances. And I will never forget the first time. It was around my hands. And I remember a ringing in my ears, like a loud ringing, like the house was reverberating, and something happened to my hands. I remember thinking, I don't know what's happening. I can't tell if they are expanding into infinite size or shrinking into nothing. It was both at the same time, and it started in my hands. I'll never forget the first time. And I was very, I don't want to say disturbed, but I'll never forget it. It was a dramatic experience. And my brother is in the top bunk. And so I didn't feel like I had a lot of freedom to get up and turn the lights on, and I would just lay in bed, and I started having these experiences. And what happened was, I'm guessing like spring of 1984, because it came to culmination in May 1984. But here's what unfolded. So I have since learned that there is a gigantic amount of science. Top scientists have studied this experience, which thousands of people have had around the world. And I'm going to cut to the end. They've studied these people. There's no pattern. They are broadly distributed across all demographics, and they invariably have one type of quote unquote mental illness as a result, which is a form of PTSD. And that form is specifically related to what is called ontological shock, which you may want to Google before you proceed watching this video. So that is the shock that the mind has when it sees something that it has no context to process or understand. And that sticks with the person, and it's like a thorn, kind of like a psychological thorn in the brain. And I did not learn about this until September 29th, 2021. Whew. And I'm just going to tell the story of what's transpired. So I would start getting this feeling that I was experiencing something very anomalous. So it would be coupled often with what is known as sleep paralysis, where you're awake, in between dreaming, but you cannot move. So I would start having these experiences where now I know a little bit more about the science that the brain produces a natural psychedelic. It is very well known, DMT. It is endogenous to various functions, and addicts use a synthetic type. The hippies, find it in ayahuasca. Pardon that word, it's not derogatory. And indigenous people originated its use. I understand it in South America. And it's important to human development in the sense that I believe it's a source of a lot of creativity. It is associated with release during things like near-death experiences, childbirth, skydiving, like all the good stuff. And, well, maybe not all the good stuff, but it is associated with times of transition, extreme stress, and it is, I believe, part of the human experience. It may, in fact, be what makes us human. I don't know. There are books calling it the God molecule. And yeah, I'm not talking about the Higgs boson, but like a neurobiological compound. It is produced in small amounts or large amounts, maybe, by the brain. And it's also found in nature, such as the vine that goes into ayahuasca, and it can be synthesized. So there are some clues that I may genetically make a lot of it. My mother, she's literally from a little town called Salem. I joke she's a witch from Salem. And she says, I dream so much that I have to wake up because I'm tired. And that's a clue, because there may be some mediation of this relating to dreams. But here's another clue. The autoinflammation gene that I have, it is known to be associated with dysregulation of immune response. But it also can be triggered by, get this, the weirdest thing, intense emotion, like things getting to you. And so that term when you say, oh, I was so upset my blood boiled, that type of thing, or just people who get triggered to the point where they actually turn red. So I have that. I won't say what it is because it's a little bit, personal, but I have some clues, which is I have often had this experience totally sober, waking up feeling so hungover. And also that being coupled with like remembering a heavy night's dream. So there is this element to, even when I'm dreaming, if something gets to me, my body may or may not release things called cytokines and also all sorts of adrenals. It's called a cytokine modulated autoinflammation or autoimmune response. And then the adrenals. So also, it was the 80s. That friend of mine, hi Dewey. I mean, people in Indiana were smoking cigarettes at 8 years old. You could go to the corner store and they would sell them to you. I mean, it was a Wild West. If you've seen the movie Stand By Me, it was that. There were even railroad tracks. And yeah, that also nicotine has an MAO inhibitor effect. And that inhibits the process in the brain that may actually hoover up neurotransmitters like DMT. So there's another clue. The brain's natural system to perhaps clear out such neurotransmitters may have been suppressed by minor tobacco exposure, nicotine. And another clue is that, yeah, these infections, so this is a weird one. Some infections can actually affect your neurobiological function. So these are naturally selected traits that may also compound and affect these systems. So it was a perfect storm. So after I got sick, my dad and I explored, I mentioned wastewater presence. We did a dye tracer study, and we released red dye into my uncle's septic tank, Harold. Hi, Harold and Velna. Hi, Mona. And the red dye went right out his septic tank into the stream that went into the river. I just remember thinking the earth is bleeding. And I just remember intuitively understanding how the groundwater is just really connected. And of course, the tiny home village right in the river upstream. So taken all together, our family had decided to move. And that was stressful for me. Love my river. It was like a person to me. Love my best friend. Didn't want to be separated. And yeah, it was very emotional. And another clue, Monroe Central Elementary had just been constructed. My third grade was in a brand new school in the 80s, early 80s, and they were still gluing stuff together when we were walking in on the first day. That place smelled like a chemical factory. I mean, it was overwhelming. And I have the dual eczema genes and the immune impairment, and that, it has another factor of being very easily triggered by things like allergens. Even if you don't have a confirmed allergy, you can get a histamine feedback loop. So many inputs into the early 80s world of Indiana and my body. So, yeah, we had decided to move to Red Key, and we were going to move the morning after the last day of school, which I have estimated is, if it's the same pattern, around May 25th, 1984. So that's when the experience culminated, but I've left out the lead up. So the hands thing, ringing in the ears, feeling like I was going both into a small dimension and a large dimension. I've mentioned DMT and all these factors. So I think what was happening is some combination of sleep paralysis and activation of that auto-inflammation gene, and perhaps some mediating factor from early childhood tobacco and nicotine exposure, an active infection for the ages. And here is what's known to be a trigger for this type of experience, be it near death or childhood or childbirth, is periods of transition that are very meaningful for the individual can together trigger such experiences, known as anomalous experiences. They're known as experiencers in the science. So this phenomenon started happening, and it would build and build and build. And it happened maybe 2 or 3 times where it was like a moderate case, and then one time it felt like maybe whatever gland stores that compound just released a lot of it. I'm not ruling out something external, but I have a master's in science, and I do believe in like a mystical, metaphorical world, but I think everything has a scientific basis. However, in fact, the chair of Harvard psychiatry has studied these experiences. He went to academic court in, I think it was the 90s, to defend his access to studying this phenomenon. And he has said that thousands of people have had these experiences. Nobody wants to talk about it. He tried to demystify it. He encountered resistance at every stage. He passed away. I don't know the circumstances, but he seemed kind of young. And I think there was a flaw in his research because he seemed to be really focused on finding an external or phenomenological, I don't know what the word, but like some external actual phenomenon. But I would say there is also a neurobiological major component, and it's something like this that, and I think anyone can potentially have this experience, be induced, but there are changes that can happen in the brain that increase its processing power, its ability to recognize and synthesize patterns, thoughts, beliefs, ideas, and again, that creativity. And it's like a new field to like microdose this and that and ayahuasca journeys. So my experience was this. I'd never touched like a drug other than tobacco. But these experiences started happening. So something would happen where there would be a transition and it would be like a flash of light. And it would be a very, very strong sensation of leaving my body, room, house, or something and going straight up. And it was absolutely terrifying because it was like an explosion of light and sensation. And it was, I lived in San Francisco in the 90s. As a young man, I have made my rounds with all the things and the parties. This was not like that. This was something that was very, 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 very real. I perceived myself to be awake, and here's what happened. I would feel myself to go up through what felt like this tube, like of light. And I'm like, what's happening? It was terrifying. And that would be kind of the last thing that I can access from here in terms of memory. And then there were flashes of these experiences that were so horrifying that it's hard to even think about them. I'm going to relay it to you. It felt like I was lying on a table and that people or something were operating on my brain with no anesthetic. That is what I remember experiencing flashes of. And I would fight and fight and fight and fight, and I couldn't move. And I would eventually develop a skill set where I could break free and start moving things around, like breaking out of a coma or something. And I got a sense that these individuals would be like, he's waking up, put him back. What? And it was like, it was not malicious. It was just very clinical, and it felt procedural. And it was like their procedure was to put me back if I broke out of whatever was paralyzing me. I think that is within the realm of neurobiology of a very nonlinear release of DMT with like 5 compounding factors, including genetics. But here is what would happen after that. I would have a very strong down motion and suddenly be back in my bed. And I would be so absolutely terrified beyond my belief, because this, in my perception, had been going on for hours. And I would scream bloody murder, scream for, ask my family. We've never actually been able to have a conversation about this. I would scream for something like 15 minutes. Because my perception is that I had just bolted upright on an operating table with no anesthetic, with very, very scary perception of what I could perceive around me. I have never been more scared in my life. And I think my family was even more scared because I would wake up, my 2 brothers and my parents, absolutely horrified. And it would take a very long time to get me to calm down and go back to bed. It was a thing. It was, it's hard to think about. Scary as shit, okay? And they were more scared than me. And we wouldn't talk about it. We would have breakfast the next day. I did them the good graces, not mentioning it. I don't think they, to this day, can process what they witnessed. And I'm sorry if you're having trouble processing hearing this, but it kept on happening. I think it happened at least 3 times, maybe 4 or 5, like a significant amount of times. And it was pretty much the same every time. And it felt like I was experiencing something that no one had any reference point for. And obviously there was no internet in 1984. And yeah, my mom, bless her heart, had this chiropractor, Dr. Brown. And he had been telling her since I was born, he's like, well, he has a purpose. I just can't figure out what it is. Like, all my life I've walked in the room like, hi, and everyone's like, what is that? I mean, I know I'm over-exaggerating, not every room, but definitely at that age, like, I had this quality of just engaging in very advanced conversations and like asking questions of like medical providers that they had never thought of, if anyone's still treating me. And Dr. Brown had, and there was some weird stuff about this guy. He would have us come in and lie down under these lamps for like half an hour, like some treatment. Don't know if it was quackery. I've looked at it, I don't know if it was like UV or black light, some weird lamp. And he was definitely an Indiana hippie, but very clinical. And I remember hearing that one day he just disappeared. Unusual person. So he hypnotized me. That was what he thought, because there was this barrier where we weren't talking about it. I also couldn't remember much about it, and it was problematic. Okay, like it was something like a medical emergency. I do believe it had a very strong neurobiological element. And I really want to emphasize, I've never again had another sleep disturbance like that. This was a limited period of time, I'm guessing over like 2 months. So he hypnotized me. And it was fruitful in the sense that we were able to recover one thing, which is that what was visiting me was, I told them a bird. And they responded by taping a picture of a bird to the wall, because Dr. Brown walked me through the hypnosis. And I somehow remembering in the hypnosis, or taking out of it, that it was an owl. A very, very intense looking flippin' owl. And I look back and I think that might just be what my brain was able to impart upon it. And he gave me one message. He said, the owl is not necessarily your enemy. And so if it happens again, just remember the owl may actually be your friend, and go with it. That was like the treatment. That was what he tried to implant, which was, don't react with terror. If it is some sort of neurobiological process, your reaction may be most of it. And it happened one more time, which is the day that we moved. It was the last day of school, I'm guessing, around May 25th, 1984. So I remember markedly that we took the bunk beds down. It was the first time in my childhood memory that I was not underneath a tossing and turning bully who is now a principal. Hello. And I remember this so vividly. And this is what the scientists have studied. And yeah, this is what happened. I was drifting off to sleep. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, there's no one above me. Because I was on the bottom bunk for my whole life that I could remember. And I just remember thinking, oh, I can see the whole night sky through the roof. I mean, I couldn't, but I just remember having that like thought and drifting off. And my ears started ringing, like loud. And I was like, well, Dr. Brown told me not to be afraid. You know, they had taped a female cardinal to the wall to comfort me, saying the bird is not unkind. I didn't actually disclose that it was an owl. Even at that age, I knew I had to be strategic with this stuff. If you remember what I told you about my grandma. So this is what happened. So going off to sleep, I remember thinking, there's that old owl again. Well, Dr. Brown told me that, I shouldn't be afraid of it. And I'm just going to go with it this time. And this time was different. I did not go upward in the weird ass tube. I remember what felt like my spirit body or my body floating up right out the window. I remember the feeling of passing through the window. This is a one-time thing, okay? Again, the people that have these experiences invariably have PTSD from ontological shock, and that has brought me great comfort because it's a perfect match for how I've responded to this, which has struggled. And okay, floated out the window toward the river, across. I remember floating across the stream to Molly Swank's property. Hi, Karen. And I remember like rotating upward and facing this green electrical owl. I can only relay what I see in my mind's eye. I'm not going to say it makes sense. Just trying to be in the microscopic truth of what I remember. And also a clue is I remember after the event not being wet or muddy. So I concluded, it wasn't a physical event because if I had crossed the stream, I'd be muddy. It wasn't me like out wandering around sleepwalking because physically I would have been muddy. So I faced this owl and I lay me down to sleep like praying for a solution to the wastewater. So my system again is primed for something like an answer. So I remember face to face the owl and it was like a legion's voice. And it was something like, we have something to show you or teach you. And I knew it was about the wastewater, the stream, the river, and me being sick, like just intuitively. And that owl somehow indicated, you can look at this on Google Earth, this garage is still there. The owl like pointed over to like behind the garage, which was only like 20 feet from the river. So I floated in the treetops, locust trees, all these beautiful Indiana large trees. And there was this light. It was like a structured liquid light that was coming down from something above our house. I didn't have any beliefs about what it was. It just is my memory of what we will, for your comfort, call a dream. But it wasn't a dream. I remember it like I was awake. And this light, like, I don't say talk to me, but it just transmitted information. And it said this. It indicated to the left. And I looked over and there was a gentleman my age now that looks just like me now. And like white robes, Methodist. Saw a lot of pictures at church. And I was like, is that Jesus? And they're like, nope. Someone's going to get a kick out of that one. The white savior person. So I looked down and I said, is that Jesus? Like, nope, it's you. Dark hair tied back, just like now, dressed in white, sitting like lotus style, floating like 2 or 3 feet above the ground. I've tried to reproduce this image in my mind. That person was also like electrical in visuality, like a hologram or something. And I remember being told, when you are that age, you will have the solution to the wastewater that made you sick. As a science fiction fan, it could have probably been the best thing that could have possibly happened to me. But it was very, very unusual. And I remember getting a sense that this Legion transmission was benevolent, but very functional, almost like a military transition to a soldier. And I just remember trying to process that and kind of like thinking, well, is there anything else that you can tell me about this solution? And I floated or moved my consciousness over to the left. Looking north, it would be the west side of the property. where we had the stream that parted into the part that went to Harold and Valna's and then off to the other, to the right of the strawberry hill where we grew strawberries. Because we grew all our own vegetables. I mean, it was a simple time. But yeah, I floated over or whatever. I mean, it was, I think a DMT modulated genetic autoinflammation stimulation during sleep, dream state modulated. I just think the brain can snap into what I would call a coherent movie-like experience and can enter into a phase of processing that is something like a survival mechanism, like when you hear about people lifting cars off people, but intellectual. And I think it probably is very taxing physiologically on the brain to be in this state, but I believe the brain has a state that can be unlocked, which effectively bridges the two halves of the brain. The heart or subconscious, I understand, does 95% of the processing. And the conscious brain is like what interfaces that, almost like querying a biological intelligence. That's your subconscious processor. DMT modulated, stress modulated, dream state modulated, genetics modulated, infection modulated, nicotine modulated. I mean, it's modulated. So this is the message. So Liggett's Greenhouse in Albany. And then I had this spot where my dad had some extra concrete that he had poured in to make a little dam. And there, for many decades, was a pond there, which I also spent a lot of time in. And the water would flow over this textured concrete surface, and it had filamentous algae on it. I remember little baby crawdads, predatory baby crawdads, would be hunting on that filamentous algae. And I'm nearsighted, I would get like 3 inches away from it and stare at it for like an hour. It was a fascinating piece of the universe. And so we had Liggett's Greenhouse, my spot that at the time I associated with the idea of wastewater pollution, but it had that filamentous algae. So it was a visual message, like a sphere formed that for me represented plants. Liggett's Greenhouse and Floral Shop is still there. Go say hi to my cousins. And then like a sphere formed that was like a hologram, like a snow globe, that for me at the time represented wastewater pollution and exposure, but don't miss the filamentous algae part. So these two spheres moved up together, they joined, and then they moved as one to whatever was above the house. And then that repeated. And then that repeated. And it like traced like all I can describe it is as a light highlighter. Like if someone had a highlighter and was tracing in the sky, and it was creating like white light, and it traced this pattern over and over and over. And this is what I understood it to mean at the time, because the space shuttle was big back then. Space program was big. It was very, for a science fiction fan and little nerd and gate program child, something of high interest. So I interpreted that as plants, wastewater, and space. Didn't think anything mystical or weird or out of the box with whatever was above the house. It was symbology. You can interpret it as what you will. It was an object. It was there. It was an object in my consciousness. It was the same object that had emanated the light behind the garage, what I call the learning light. And so it traced it over and over and over. And I remember like an internal tutor, this legion, I didn't hear voices. It was just like a transmission of a collective saying, plants, wastewater, space. Plants, wastewater, space. Space program. And I remember the moment where I kind of got it. 3 words, 3 concepts. And I remember instantly plucking out of my memory 2 pop culture references. One, Star Wars, spacecraft, blinking lights and stuff. And that scene from E.T., which I had seen on my 6th birthday and will never forget it. And I didn't connect it with anything like that at the time. It was just a movie reference. When they showed E.T.'s ship with like the plastic plants and like the dry ice fog. That was like the only synthesis that I took what felt like was transmitted to me into 2 references that I could remember to this day. I remember thinking of those references in the dream as the only thing in my memory that I could correlate to what was being given to me almost certainly by my subconscious mind. Or there is an extension, which is that perhaps the mind can be altered into a state that it can actually tune into ambient information, such as thinking about what the greenhouse represents and this place where I would almost certainly be most exposed to pathogens, and the space program or whatever was above my house. So I synthesized that into just plants, wastewater, space. I had the 2 movie references, and I remember thinking, you got to remember this. And I remember thinking, you got to remember that shape in the sky, which I have since tried to decode. It is like a flipped lowercase lambda, the Greek letter. And by gosh, if it does not have just about the deepest meaning that can be synthesized from inverting a lowercase lambda. I mean, it's on my social media. I just looked it up recently and I was like, oh my gosh, it represents, if you synthesize the inverse of something like a lowercase lambda, the golden rule, karma, closed ecological life support systems, the idea of reciprocity, which is the opposite of hierarchy, closed ecological life support systems. And basically, if you could sum up one symbol for a living Aina, reciprocity, the end of hierarchical masculine energy structures into a level playing field or a circle of feminine divine power, this symbol has it all. And I don't know that it existed. I've synthesized this from inverting what it means when it's not inverted, and it is a zinger. And I remember thinking, you gotta remember that. And I did not look that up until last year, as in try to understand what it means. So there's just so many layers of meaning to this. And yeah, I've been on here for quite some time, but I want to be efficient. So I listened. I have devoted my whole career to trying to explore what that plants, wastewater, space means. And it started the very next year at Red Key Elementary, and they had the Apple IIe computers, and I just had an intuitive sense. I gotta get on the computer. I gotta figure out this wastewater plant space thing like now. Of course, straight into the GATE program. My hippy dippy teacher at Red Key Elementary, she was teaching us meditation, astral projection, and controlling your heartbeat for a fourth grader. Pretty advanced stuff. And I was waiting to use the Apple IIe because, of course, all they taught us back then was about pioneers. Indiana did not talk about Native people. Sorry. So weird. But I was waiting to play Oregon Trail, and I remember the cursor, Apple IIe blinking. Andrea and Tanya were taking a lot of time, and I tuned into that cursor. I said, you know, my GT program teacher taught me how to change my heartbeat rate. Let's see if I can get my heartbeat in my boredom to match that cursor. And if I did not have, I did it, and then my body protested, and I had a grand mal seizure on the spot, 4th grade, and it was terrifying. And Mrs. Michaels, bless her heart, big old butt, she decided that the best thing to do for a child having a seizure is to, as fast as she could move, grab me and drag me over 100 meters, if not 200 meters, to the nurse's office, which she managed to start doing about 30 seconds into the seizure. Like the seizure wasn't fully set in. And halfway being dragged on the nasty-ass dirty floor of the west wing of Red Key Elementary, I decided, well, trying to navigate the seizure and being assaulted by my teacher, I think the best thing to do is just try to go limp, which is hard to do when you're having a grand mal seizure. Injured the living daylights out of my neck. And traumatizing. So traumatizing. I mean, having a seizure. I was also that kid already. And you may understand I might be a little bit feminine. So it was a perfect storm of embarrassment, shame, and people just being, yeah, he is a weirdo. Yeah, he's a weirdo. The guy that gets all the top grades is a weirdo. And boy, Dr. Wentz, I'm not making up his name, decided that instead of waiting until a child has a second seizure, which is the protocol for medicating someone, because there's a thing called a developmental seizure that can maybe be induced by being taught to change your heartbeat and staring at the Apple IIe. They medicated the living daylights out of me. One seizure, that's not the procedure. Maybe it was then. Now you wait to your second because it may, as in many cases, be developmental, which I'm sure it was not only developmental, but induced. So I basically lights out. I was medicated so hard. I'm guessing chokes me up. I'm guessing anticonvulsants. But apparently from the outside, I was just no longer home, combative, was no longer getting the top grades, and was just a zombie. And my mom intuitively said, this is not right. This is not right. And she fought and fought and fought. She fought and fought and fought. I think she actually did gain permission of the doctor to taper me off, being heavily medicated with anticonvulsants. That's my first of 3 bouts with improper medication. And I remember, so my mom was church secretary at Albany United Methodist Church. My dad was superintendent of, what's it called? Children's sermon school, whatever. Bible school. So my mom was church secretary. I remember being very hard in terms of my nervous system being just so broadsided by being so heavily medicated. So I remember coming to and being like, what just happened? Like basically the last thing I remember was a seizure and being really sore and traumatized and dragged during a seizure. And I just remember hearing my dad was a carpenter that there was going to be a carpenters union convention. And by the way, I had been to one in Washington, D.C. and watched Reagan get shot from the hotel. So yeah, carpenters union. Seeing the world. But it was in Honolulu, November of 1985. I remember arranging my desk in Mr. Caldwell's room, had all my transformers and mechanical pencils, and setting off for... So Reverend Fritz said, I remember overhearing him talk to my mom, you'll never have another chance to go to Hawaii. Like, go. She's like, we can't afford it. We're not the type to go on vacation. You know, we're like, we grow our own food because we can't afford it. And he said, Fran, you go, you make it happen. Like, you're never going to have another chance. And sure enough, went to the Carpenters Convention in Oahu in November of 1985. I had never been on a plane before. Oh my gosh. It was amazing. And God bless the travel agent who said, well, you got to go to Maui. So first week, Honolulu convention, I was like, oh, it's like Indianapolis with the beach. I mean, it was a beautiful beach, but it was just a downtown city. I got stuck in an elevator with these 2 very generous, beautiful gospel singers from Chicago. We were in that elevator for like 2 hours. Kept going up and down and up and down. There had to be 1,000 pounds in that elevator, and it malfunctioned, and I was reported missing. I'd gone to the ABC store on my own, and I'm sure there's a missing child report for me in Oahu in November 1985. Someone do a UIAPA. And it was a near-death experience. It is my phobia. I don't know if I'd ever been in an elevator like that. I was so terrified. And my mind was wiped clean with terror. I mean, it was so terrifying. And another thing I remember about Oahu, my sister Tish, y'all had Cabbage Patch Kids because all they had was crumbs at the Muncie Mall. And I think there were tears when she got her Cabbage Patch Kid. But yeah, a week later, we're in Maui, in Napili. And I went snorkeling for the first time, and it was an absolutely life-changing experience because my river was like mud. And I was so overjoyed to see that there's stuff down there, and it's alive and it's beautiful. And that impressed upon me so. It was like the other half of the transmission, which is plants, wastewater, space. Here's what it looks like broken. Here's what is achievable. And I didn't actually plan on coming back to Maui. It was Valhalla. It was the vision that I had intended to reinstall everywhere else. And I came back in 1999 after many universities still following this dream. In 97, I had uncovered the next breadcrumb in a directed study. It was like a pass-fail 1-unit directed study called To Mars by 2012. Like, why would you go to Mars? But I found a breadcrumb, a clue, closed ecological life support systems. I'm like, oh, that is where plants in space lives. Oh, sorry. Closed ecological life support systems. And that was an absolutely revolutionary clue that was the field. And I graduated in 98, mechanical engineering, UC Berkeley, before Google. It was not trivial. And I was also navigating underground dance music culture, if you know what I mean. Basically, on my own in California, navigating some challenges. 1999, party of the century, West Maui, Stompy, all the house music heads, and we were in Napili, staying in Napili, and I remember going snorkeling. I think it was Black Rock, and the reef had declined. I did not expect that. I understand they've gotten biological nutrient removal and disinfection in West Maui at the municipal treatment plant since then, but it was degraded. And I remember being kind of beside myself. Like, I didn't know that could change, especially on such a short time scale. And yeah, I was not happy about that. It felt like a seismic shift in my mental map of the universe and what I was fighting for. And I went scuba diving for the second time ever in Molokai, took a boat over there, and had this interaction with an octopus for quite some time. And I remember having in my mental map that octopus saying, yeah, it's still pretty good over here, but yeah, it is struggling over there. Not saying, but just, my transpersonal space. And then later, on the way to the ER, my friend had an allergic reaction to bee pollen. I Topher. And I'm just the one that, had the EpiPen. It was like Pulp Fiction moment. We didn't use the EpiPen, but I was the person to ride with him to the ER, Maui Memorial, the last few days of 1999. And in the front of that ambulance, he remembers it, hearing me squeal, a whale! Like, I knew there were whales, didn't know about the season, didn't know much about it, and it was another very impactful experience because I had just seen the reefs, and my mind synthesized, oh, that whale's asking for help. And then I did the road to Hana, first days of 2000, and had like another transpersonal moment at the shrine at Pu'alu in Kipahulu. And it was in that moment that I became absolutely steeled that I was going to go back to graduate school. And I remember hearing, "You got this," the moment I went past that shrine. And I did. Google was online then. I found the optimal school in the entire country. University of Colorado, Boulder Aerospace Engineering, Masters of Science. I signed up to work at BioServe Space Technologies. It was perfect. And I was a TA for aerospace mechanics, of which orbital mechanics is just one section. And wasn't really fit for it, and got a research assistantship at BioServe Space Technologies, a NASA commercial space center. And they said to me with a straight face, "We have a gap on the Space Shuttle Atlantis and the International Space Station. And we have this plant generic bioprocessing apparatus. There's nothing generic about it, by the way. Would you like to help us with an experimental insert, specifically the nutrient delivery system?" I said, "Yes, I would." Yes, I would. Can you imagine the synchronicity of that? I'm guessing that kicked off around August of 2001. 14 months from a hand-wavy, maybe it could do this, from a scientist from NASA Ames Research Center to launch. Not negotiable. They're not going to wait on you. And I taught myself SolidWorks from the help menu. I had a semester of CAD at City College. Had an incredible experience with the machines shop staff. And 14 months later, I was taking incompletes, working 12-hour days. I know exactly what it feels like to navigate Cape Canaveral, Kennedy Space Center. I remember autoclaving some tubing over and over. It kept turning smoky in color, but we decided it was fine. I mean, almost infinite detail had to be incorporated. Bespoke, machining from some commercial off-the-shelf parts, and also just machining parts from scratch. This is before, you could just print something. It was hard, and it worked. They never let me forget that one of the seed packs was 1 gram short. But it effectively operated perfectly after launch in October of 2002. Was up for a couple months. And, if you were in Maui at that time, maybe you saw a slow-moving star. That was a very early version of the space station. It was Assembly Mission 9A. And it failed. The seeds of Arabidopsis for the space Arabidopsis genomics experiment did not germinate. And they invested quite a lot in understanding why. And it didn't because nutrient crystals had formed on the seeds, even though it was an optimized plant growth solution. I believe it was BG11. And it failed. I thought to myself, well, if an optimized solution fails under what is kind of like a hot and windy condition, reuse is not going to be sustainable. That was what I concluded. Put it on the shelf. Plants, wastewater space. Put basically what's now called irrigation reuse on the shelf, because I concluded if this very, very well-designed experiment fails for too much nutrients, 5 or 10 years after reuse, it's going to be a problem. And it's a failure mode. And now we know that also reuse, introducing too much nutrients, can go into the reefs and cause problems too. But I didn't give up. I said, it's something else photosynthesis related. I got what I would call a dream job as a fresh out at NASA Ames Research Center in 2003. Systems engineer for the Space Station Biological Research Project. I worked on an incubator payload. I worked on an artificial gravity rotating payload system, fluid slip joint. Had meetings with JAXA and Boeing, and I solved like $1 million problem. I don't know the exact price tag, but yeah, moisture intrusion on a sensor on the incubator, which just, it was, I don't know. The experience was a little disheartening because I thought there'd be a little bit more going on in there, but I still had the same experience of where'd this guy come from, and I don't know, almost making him look bad. I don't know if anyone else had that perception, but I definitely would solve problems that I think Lockheed had been hoping to spend a lot of money to solve. And I don't know. It kind of put a target on my back. And then the space station biological research project was canceled, and I was transferred to the mechanical engineering branch. And oh, did my troubles begin, because these people were very much not happy and did not treat me in a way that I felt to be respectful. I was crammed into an office with one other person and the lunch toaster, and people would just bring their fish in all day, and I felt barely tolerated. And then it started to get problematic because I was in a car wreck. And July 1st, 2004, just hit so hard. Torsional and shearing, dual ruptured discs. And by gosh, they wouldn't give me the surgery that was prescribed, a hybrid disc replacement. And I suffered with a major spine injury from 2004 to 2010, when I eventually had to pay out of pocket for it. I mean, it was insane. And in 2005, it became clear they were trying to get rid of me. They wouldn't give me the surgery I need. They wouldn't let me work from home, not even 1 hour. And I was living in San Francisco trying to commute to Moffett Field. Probably one of the most brutal commutes in the world. Silicon Valley 101. You can also take, the other freeway, but that one's out of the way. So I was like, somehow still making it to work enough to keep my job with a major spine injury and no treatment. I mean, it was awkward. And the treatment that they wanted to give me was the one that poor gentleman who shot the poor executive, he got this treatment that they were trying to give me, which is like a straight up fusion. And I was a mechanical engineer by training. I knew that was not good, and it led to failed back syndrome. And I simply would not take the wrong surgery. They wouldn't give me the right surgery. And what ended up happening is I tried to navigate life for 6 years, the major spine injury. The only way I knew how to do it was pretty much self-medicating the most severe pain I could imagine. And that included my primary doctor saying, this is off-label, but when people have intractable pain, we like to give them off-label antidepressants. I'm like, I'm not depressed. They're like, we know, but you have this pain. They won't give you the surgery you need. And that became my second bout of improper medication, off-label, wrong medication. And by layering on all these self-medications, I somehow was able to navigate that. But they were straight up trying to get rid of me with this whole not allowing me to telework when I couldn't work. They would give me leave without pay. It wasn't enough to really live on. And it started to become problematic. And I decided I had to act, that these people wanted to get rid of me. And so I started the LGBT advisory group, historic LGBT group at NASA that apparently went all the way to the president's desk. Hello, George. And I believe it was approved. Maybe it wasn't the group, or maybe it was marching in the first Pride Parade in 2005, which I somehow pushed through. But just that period of my life was surreal because I had this severe spine injury. The surgery that was indicated just wasn't covered. I now know that early things like machine learning were used to assess risk based on people's demographic. And maybe I just wasn't the type of person that was worth saving. I don't know. But I was in dire straits, and it felt like being dragged behind a car. But I was driving it, navigating the 101 with a spine injury. I mean, it was absurd. And I still pushed through because I'm just weird about that dream. I wasn't going to give up. And 2007, I met my husband, Jacob Balakui. Some friends of mine said, there's a rave at NASA. I said, what? Yuri's night. They actually had a dance party with DJs at NASA. I had to go all the way out of the center and come back in. And there was Jake selling tickets. And I had had a premonition my whole life that I would meet a person and that it would be something cosmic. And I just instantly knew it was him. I argued with him that I didn't have to pay. I work here. But my point was to make sure he knew I worked there. And it was like flirting, but an argument about me thinking that I didn't have to pay, but I knew I had to pay. I just wanted to like interact with him more. And then I saw him again at a Dior concert at Shoreline. And again, it was like the space-time continuum blurred when I saw him. And then later I was on a dance floor. Yes, I was still dancing. And somebody came up and grabbed my suspenders. It took me about 30 seconds to realize it's him. And he never let go of my suspenders. We were inseparable from that point on. Such a beautiful man. His father was from Tehran, a refugee. His mother was from Poland, a brilliant materials scientist. She is. Hi, Maria. And yeah, we were married on the last 2 days that it was legal. Halloween 2008, because I had had this experience at a festival. Ooh, it chokes me up. Where I had been in a state and saw a display with microalgae, and I swear this vision came down from the sky like light codes. And the first, what was then called the Omega, was born. That was September 2007. I was so impressed that this idea came to me to convert wastewater to jet fuel using microalgae in membrane enclosures. I was beside myself because I knew it was real. I knew it was real. I remember not talking much for 2 weeks because I was so impressed. If it's not plants, wastewater, space, it's microalgae. And by the way, you can make unlimited fuel out of it. Oh my gosh. So I was actually planning on starting my own company off this. And my leave for, I had an initial spine surgery, a laminectomy, because this is what the doctor told me. He said, this probably won't help you, but we need to give it to you because you will never get the surgery that you actually need until you move through this surgery that we don't think will help you. It might help you. That's how the American health care system works, apparently. I got the laminectomy in April of 2008, and before I went under, I'm kind of freaked out by general anesthesia. Not that I'll die, but that I'll forget something. So I wrote down all of my ideas on or around, it's dated April 11th, 4011, 2008. I recovered from that surgery, actually did have some benefit, moved in with my future husband in the Upper Haight, H-I-G-H-T, in San Francisco, and I've never been happier. He and I perceived that I had in my brain, it was like our child, a way to convert wastewater to jet fuel. We carried that, and I was planning on starting my own startup. I went in on or around October 1st, 2008, going around running my mouth about this idea and that I'm actually leaving my job and I'm just kind of saying goodbye. And I remember the gentleman that I had worked under for the flexible membrane commode, John Hogan, I believe his name is. There's different Johns. John, I believe it's John Hogan. Anyways, I was in his office and I said, yes, these enclosures for growing algae have this cool idea. He's like, that's weird. There is a project right down the hallway that sounds a lot like that. I said, oh, I just remember thinking, oh no, am I going to get pulled back into this? I just remember thinking, that's cool, but that might imply that I'm not leaving this job, which has been very problematic and difficult. Went down the hallway, met a certain doctor, and learned about what was called the Omega Project, which is to put my idea, membrane enclosures for growing microalgae on sewage, horrible idea to put it on top of a body of water, which I never really agreed with. But it was a way for me to, I don't say sneak in, but I never disclosed that I had the idea because NASA had been so hostile toward me And I just kind of snuck in, and my philosophy was, well, I have the best tools in the world. The P lab is across from the poop lab. And yeah, I know my heat sealer. I had all the tools I needed to kind of sneak in and make them. And I did that. I was the only person to make them for a year. And from October 1st, 2008 to October 1st, 2009, here's where it gets funny. So they introduced me to the person that I'd be working with. I don't want to call attention to her, but her name. She is from Eritrea, and she was my Kiki best NASA friend, probably the only person I'm still in touch with there. And her name is Sege, Tsege. And of course, I was the founder of the LGBT advisory group. We had done the cool stuff like have Sulu from Star Trek. Hi, George. Sorry for leaving you at the airport. But yeah, she was a SETI contractor. I'm not making this up. Her job was to manage the alien culture if ever found. And they said, hi, this is Travis. Does anyone follow me? How funny that is. And I proceeded to produce what I consider to be a new life form, the omega. It is a mega cell. It's just like a microalgae cell, but it's like human scale. And boy, did that get some attention. The center director, Pete Warden, can't make this stuff up, would sit there and stare at him, but he wouldn't talk to me. And we're still friends on Facebook, but yeah, it was awkward because I would produce these things and they would take them off into the big boy rooms where they would talk about it without including me. That's a theme. But of course, hope you're hearing that it was a unique design that I brought from a visionary experience that traces back decades. And then the weirdest thing happened. These weirdo people came in, John Perry Barlow, Matthew Atwood, and they were yucky yuck. And they licensed the patent and worked with a law firm called Denton's to do so. And they basically, so the patent came out, a provisional patent, and it had everyone's name on it but mine. And they're like, well, you missed one meeting. I'm like, yeah, well, you won't let me call in. They wouldn't let me call into any meeting. I had to be there physically. So they created a barrier for me to attend a meeting. Because, by the way, they had made me move my own office, and I had fallen on absolutely degraded stairs. So I had been set back physically in my spine health. I was kind of back where I started. And they're like, well, you missed one meeting, which you're not allowed to attend remotely. And your name's not on the patent. Sorry, you'll be on the next one. And I determined in that moment that despite all my years of effort, I would never have health care for my partner, who, by the way, had fallen ill after being given something by that Matt Atwood character that wasn't what he said it was. That was on or around New Year's Eve, 2008, 2009. My husband basically was given something that wasn't what he said it was and was permanently mentally ill from that point onward. I really want you to pay attention to that. Matthew Atwood poisoned my husband. And I just wasn't thinking in a nefarious way at the time. I was trying to navigate this, and it was chaos. These people from what became Algae Systems just invaded our project. And then they were like in the labs, like picking fights, like almost like physical fights. We had these weird ass retreats at a place called the Goddess Temple, associated with Christopher Hills, the father of Spirulina. Penny Slinger was the host, and it was weird. It was weird, ritualistic, weird cult stuff. And what happened is when I was not on that patent, I decided they are never going to give us health care. This can be life and death, and I need to get out of here. So on October 1st, 2009, I said, kicking my family, we're out. We're not in the patent. This is intolerable. And the idea was these people from Algae Systems perhaps improperly had promised us a job and healthcare. Straight up promised it. And it was like out of the frying pan into the fire. They had no intention of hiring us. A month after, we had been emailing them about, hey, when are we starting? John Perry Barlow, author of half the Grateful Dead songs and FBI affiliated, if anyone didn't catch that, proceeded to come over our house and try to talk us into doing injection drugs. This is like my perceived new boss. I have never done that and never will. The only person that's ever put a needle in my arm is a medical professional. But I did have the thought, oh my gosh, this is in my wheelhouse. I'm a stupid San Francisco partier. Yeah, I can do this. And ended up in the ER, following the direction of my new boss. And abruptly stopping all medications that had been given to manage that intense pain. Yeah, not such a good idea. And I basically had an eretrogenic withdrawal episode for the ages. Because again, they had medicated pain with off-label things like multiple antidepressants, not what they're indicated for. And ended up in a ward, like incarcerated. John Perry Barlow had come into our home, and we were previously sitting around, two nerds on our computers. And it was catastrophic. And I realized I'm like in danger. We had moved into this basement apartment so I could be close enough to the train to schlep down there because I couldn't even drive anymore. I had sold my car and my spine was so bad. And I recognized that this environment may actually be the end of us. We had no income. We did not have money to pay rent. And what we did now, just no one should ever do this. Do not do what we did, which was evacuate and jump with one-way flights, because the signal that I had is if you can make it back to that shrine, which I now know to be Pu'a'alu in Kipahulu, it was this gigantic act of faith. There was like a signal. And again, that whole chapter of my life, 10 years, 1999 to 2009, was intentionally devoted to developing a solution for wastewaters for reefs in Maui, which I never told a single soul at NASA. It was like my holy mission. So we get on a plane, no money, no credit capacity. I was not really connected to my family in that way. I hadn't asked for support for a long time. We found ourselves in a van that we picked up at one of the haiku canneries, camping. And it was quite scary, except I was in the most craziest, unmoderated, unmediated pain. You couldn't have paid me enough to take a painkiller. But my mind was clear, and I would have made that trade any day. Those medications were horrible. It was like a mini lobotomy, and I was clear-headed, 8 or 9 out of 10 pain, just straight up pinched nerve, sciatica out into the earth. So much pain, so happy to have escaped what felt like oblivion in a basement in San Francisco. So a few things happened, and we ended up at the shrine in Kipahulu. And I was like, well, that's pretty much all I had planned. Didn't really have any more money. And Auntie Nani and Uncle Joey pull over at the side of the road and like, hey, party! And she invited us over to Pu'a'alu, which I now know to be the actual source of the holy water for the old-timey priests, which is where I had gotten that transmission of "you got this" 10 years earlier, and was basically adopted. I now know that Auntie Nani said to Uncle Joey in private, I don't understand this, but these people are significant, they're in danger, and we have to protect them. It was all intuitive. And I remember waking up at the cabin at the top of Pualu, like this bull would come up to our door at night and breathe, like curious. We would watch the sunrise. You could hear the whales. One morning I woke up and I decided or realized, you're AWOL, technically. They're not giving you any further leave. They're really trying to finish off your career. And still had the spine injury and treated. And I decided, yeah, they're going to hunt you down. Those devices are tracked. I proceeded to break a laptop and a phone. And it turns out later, I found out they were indeed tracking us. And they said in a hearing later when I contested my firing, yeah, we lost track of you. So my intuition was right. They were tracking us and indeed probably would have raided them. So yeah, these are the things I've had to navigate, having all these security clearances. But yeah, chaos ensued after that happened. I was separated from Jake. He ended up going back to Chicago and I ended up in Indiana. I somehow managed to get in with a spine surgeon, Dr. Bervin, bless his heart. And he, with another doctor, Dr. Kondrashov, found out, after I threatened to go, I actually had a whole plan to go to Germany for the surgery. And once they heard that, they said, oh, we're losing one. And they offered to give me the surgery at 10% on the dollar. So kind of them. I only had to pay $25,000 that I did not have to access a surgery that is routine in Europe. And yeah, got the surgery. Anterior approach, 7 pieces of titanium still in my spine. And yeah, it was very painful. It took a long time to get off painkillers. And after a very stressful familial interaction in Indiana in Thanksgiving of 2010, where my brother apparently, because he had perceived that in the past I had used cannabis to taper off of time-release morphine, he decided it was his place to just absolutely have one of those Thanksgivings where people are about to fight over a joke that I had sent. And basically my elder brothers had it in for me. And their big issue was that I had in the past touched cannabis to taper off of medication, painkillers after a major spine surgery. Routine stuff these days. So we fled Indiana. I actually had planned to stay in Indiana with my Persian Polish refugee husband and just disappear. But I was like, well, it's not safe here. So we came back. Yeah, we landed in Maui. Had to be December of 2010. And ostensibly, we're still trying to work with these Algae Systems people, but to this day, never paid us $1. Not $1. And yeah, Jake still did not have access to healthcare for what was diagnosed as bipolar, which again started after what I remember to be on or around New Year's Eve, 2008, 2009, when Matt Atwood had given him some sort of substance that was not what he said it was. And yeah, Jake couldn't hang. We were living out in Huelo, hitchhiking, no vehicle, hardly any income. I was still struggling with pain, and he left. It was too much. I challenge any couple to navigate that. And again, it went from #1 California Energy Commission, $15 million grant, inventor, but not on the patent, award, which I later got an award for after they forced me out, to basically low-key homeless, no car, no health care, no income. Thanks, DOMA. Yeah. Defensive Marriage Act. It matters. So, yeah, I've been here on and off ever since without him. And yeah, we were basically ripped apart by strain that I don't know that any couple could endure. And yeah, I stayed in Maui until, I was still trying to put forth a land-based version of the microalgae solution. And Maalaea was the place to do that. So in 2010 on, I was focused on developing a regional system in Maalaea. Didn't know I had any of those genetic mutations yet. And I had somehow morphed into something like a pain-free, totally recovered spine surgery recipient, which is almost unheard of. And I would wake up at like 5:30 a.m. and check the surf report and scoot down to Ho'okipa. I was like a new person. Had a basically pain-free experience. It was like a superhero, very brief superhero-like phase. No medication to speak of, no pain to speak of. I was bodyboarding almost every morning. And my goal was to just restabilize my mind, body, and soul. And I did a very good job of it. I was healthy and a boarder. I was a boarder. And I was laser focused on a solution for Maalaea where all those injection wells were. So around late 2011, I had made some progress. I had some meetings with Spencer. In fact, I ended up walking that lot above Maalaea with the elder Spencer, bless his heart, his soul now. And I had some close friends, including, I call him hi Noah, my friend Noah. He's a person that taught me everything I know about boarding. Couldn't quite get into the duck diving because I'm 6'4", 200 some pounds. But yeah, basically adopted by a Hawaiian, lovely family. And I was a boarder. I was a healthy, clean-hearted, clean-spirit, happy, healthy, almost pain-free boarder. And we decided to go down to Maalaea because I wanted to try it out down there. I heard they had great waves. Spent a couple hours in there, and the water did not look good. Okay, it looked like my river. And I ended up getting really sick. I don't remember having open wounds, just feeling yuck. Now I know I probably had some kind of low-level infection, and it was activating that autoinflammation loop, and I felt icky and dookie, bad. Of course, the dual eczema genes, skin impairment, bubble boy, no bubble, boiling blood, and by the way, the skin impairment also impairs epithelial cells, vascular stuff. And I realize now, I was told that elders on both sides of my family had lower extremity swelling. Perfect storm. I haven't even mentioned that I had surgery down there, like hydrocell after a minor abuse episode that I was not awake for. So a lot of compounding factors. So I had gone to meet with the Spencers, and it was like a 9:30 a.m. meeting at their compound, like in the valley. A colleague that I later worked with was there, and we went to a cafe in Wailuku. And my right leg was in the sun, my left leg was in the shade. I remember remarking the difference in temperature, and the right leg, which is the same place where I have the inguinal scarring, I had a little bit of inguinal lymphedema. Didn't know that that was a name for it at the time after a 2009 surgery. And my leg started to swell. It remains swollen to this day. Turns out that was the last time that I went boarding and was actually able to enjoy it. And yeah, I've since found that it is chaos and mayhem down there. Not a single compliant system in the house, including the condos. So that was catastrophic because it initially swelled a lot. Like when this sets in, there's a word for it, elephantiasis, not elephantitis, elephantiasis. And that is lymphedema. We see it in third world countries from filariasis, like a worm that gets in your lymph nodes. And it's just uncontrolled swelling, lymphatic fluid. I'll never remember being in a doctor's office up in Makawa and being told, this is permanent, there's no treatment. There's lymphatic drainage therapy and compression. So I started wearing compression garments, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I was elevating my leg many hours a day. In the middle of this, got an opportunity to work at the algae farm in Kihei. And Jake, in his heroic heart, agreed to come and help me get to work when I was dealing with onset lymphedema, and worked my tail off down there. But eventually, it got so bad, and Jake again couldn't hang. Jake still doesn't have treatment. I still don't have an income to speak of. This is like 2012, okay? Years and years of just absolute financial, I don't even know what you want to call it. Basically no resources. And Jake flew the coop again, and I'm sitting there in haiku, elevating my leg. I somehow navigated to get in for a surgery with a world-leading expert on lymphaticovenous anastomosis, microvascular surgery to go into many parts of the leg to try to join the veins and arteries, a very unnatural thing that would, in theory, drain the leg from within. And I got that in Los Angeles in 2013. Jake flew out to help me with the surgery. It's really the last time that we really got to spend a significant amount of time together. And yeah, as always, just cosmic best friends. And I then flew home to Indiana to recover. And I was there for approximately a year, and that is when the infections started setting in. By the way, I had been prescribed something to help me sleep in 2012 because I did not know about the genetic mutation, immune impairment, autoinflammation. And so my nervous system was in this inflammatory feedback loop, which led to considerable distress and trouble sleeping. And that was treated at face value as a mental health problem. Well, yeah, I was distressed. Yes, I do have PTSD from various things. But that is not what the core issue was. The core issue was an out of control autoinflammation feedback loop, a cytokine modulated and adrenal modulated hyperstimulation state that's kind of like being in a car wreck and having 102 fever. Not fun. This stuff is not fun. And my very, 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 very not informed treating psychiatrist medicated the living daylights out of me. We're talking 3 medications. It was never diagnosed as anything ultimately written down other than PTSD. Originally framed as bipolar, but he eliminated that. Those diagnoses have haunted me at every stage. But at the core of it, it was not that. I now know that it was an autoinflammation feedback loop, and I recently found treatment for it for the first time in my life, which is low-dose naltrexone and various antihistamines. Here's the sad part. The medications that I was given, especially one of them, can impair your immune system. In fact, my immunologist tells me now that after 13 years of that stuff, she said I may or may not be able to make my own antibodies anymore, just from that medication, which is horribly counterindicated for someone with my genetic mutations. Here's what's worse. Anyone who takes that medication, one of them, for an extended period, which again was given to me for sleep, and like racing thoughts, which yeah, if you're having an autoinflammation explosion, you're gonna have racing thoughts. So one of those medications alone can absolutely wreck your bone marrow, just without any of these other complicating factors. And it looks like that may have happened. So, that is a lot. But yeah, I still navigated it. Still never gave up on the dream. And yeah, I started getting sick in Indiana. I got really bad poison ivy. I was given prednisone, which on top of also an inhaler with a corticosteroid was probably like a 7th immunocompromising factor. I got cellulitis in my leg the first time, absolutely terrifying, and ended up at the ER in the same hospital I was born in, Ball Memorial. And yeah, they had no handle on this. And my thinking in 2014 was this may be it for me. I am not going out like this. I'm like, the thinking was, I'm going to go to Maui. We're going to have one last try at trying to figure this stuff out. And I just kind of don't want to go out living with my parents at whatever age I was that year. And yeah, I would have been almost 40. Living with my parents, rocket scientists. And moved back to Maui. No plan for housing. Absolute chaos. Moved in with my lovely friends, and they had this dog that had all these open sores. Pootie. And yeah, that's not a good mix for someone with all my conditions. I ended up hospitalized for cellulitis twice, 2014. Doing stupid stuff, partying, lost. Absolutely lost. I was lost. Had no handle on anything. I was told I was mentally ill, but it was almost certainly 95% autoinflammation, infections, bad medication that compounded with my genetic mutations was catastrophically bad medicine. And yeah, it was just chaos because the treating physician has since said, because I found if you're given this medication, you should be monitoring people's blood. And the first time I got that monitored, many years later, my blood work was horrible. I had the immune system of an HIV/AIDS advanced patient. And it showed. I kept getting infection after infection and after infection. I would say to this treating physician, I don't understand this. I know the lymphedema is immunocompromising, but this is crazy. And then, I mean, there were a lot of other things going on, but I've been on here for a while. My battery's getting low. I have no power. But I hope you hear how chaotic my healthcare was, how uninformed it was. No genetics test, no monitoring of my immune system. And I got to the point where I was seeing this treating physician once every 6 months. He would fall asleep when I was talking to him. Fall asleep. He would not really allow me to talk about my trauma. He would interrupt me and say thank you. Like that non-duality stuff. Bless his heart. I'm not going to say his name, but it was not what I needed. What I needed was physiological care for what turns out to be an autoinflammation feedback loop that was spiraling out of control. And then here's the thing. These medications have horrible, probably some of the worst withdrawal iatrogenic symptoms. They're almost impossible, especially the one, almost impossible to stop. And I tried over and over and over. And the dream state became so chaotic with all these hidden compounding factors that I was just locked into the treatment. I kept being advised, you need this. Don't stop it. Almost like saying, I'm a risk. Almost like I was being managed as a risk, not a sick person. Whew, that was heavy. Ended up basically unsheltered, living in a home that was unlivable, that was soon foreclosed on, with some people that had choices that were made, and it was probably the worst situation that I could have possibly found myself in. It was not good. And in the midst of that, Jake passed. In the worst way imaginable, if you can imagine that. I don't recommend it. It is a way that people with bipolar disorder, untreated, tend to go. Again, it started in one day after Matthew Atwood provided him with something that was not what he said it was. And I really want you to notice the part where he is a Mason and he is affiliated with John Perry Barlow. And they are in that whole field of like hard drug use, weird stuff. So, yeah. Lost Jake, May of 2015, living with some people that seemed annoyed that I was experiencing that loss. It was a very, very scary period of my life. Very scary. And I barely navigated it. And I basically came to one day in a household of chaos. And I was living with the other woman in the Charlie Scott case. I won't say her name. But I believe that I witnessed firsthand the dynamic that led to the loss of Charlie Scott. And when I am just going to say that I consciously recognized the dynamic and prevented it from unfolding again. Sometimes physically placing my body in between what appeared to be another passing of a human individual. And I may, if I don't get a phone call from the authorities after that, just in case they do release the person that did that to Charlie Scott, yeah, I'm inviting a phone call from authorities because I have information that is relevant. And I am telling you again that I physically placed myself in danger to stop that dynamic from unfolding again. Another life from being lost. I won't say who it is. But I basically came to one day and realized that I was in the presence of bad things and consciously navigated all of the people in that household out of it in a way that no one was injured in the moment. Someone did come out of it with MS, which I witnessed happen in real time too. And it was absolutely terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. Dark. I love all those people. It's just that people have what I call I don't want to call it possession, neurological dysfunction, processing into the back of the brain, addiction, whatever you want to call it. But no one died, and I had to make that happen consciously. So, spit out into unsheltered status, living in 5 corners with a toilet in the corner of a 264 square foot studio, which I lived in until this May. It is now August 18th. So I was basically unsheltered by the federal standard from 2017 to May of 2026. Not fun. Didn't know about the genetic mutations. Turns out it's not a really good idea to have a non-enclosed toilet in the corner of a room if you have all my features. And then I said, so 2015, Jake passed. I'm like, okay, I got to make this meaningful. I'm going to solve the nutrient problem. Called someone that I quote unquote planted at NASA. I said, hey, do you know anything that could help with this nutrient problem? He said, the final Omega Project, which I still have never seen, the final Omega Project report, it compared the Omegas to turf scrubbers. I said, what's that? Attached filamentous macroalgae. The same thing that was in my spot next to the pond where the little bitty crawdads would hunt. I was like, that resonates. So the idea with an attached algae turf scrubber is that you pass effluent over the attached algae. They consume the nutrients and other impurities. You harvest the biomass similar to the microalgae to make fuel or whatever you will. And that just was the missing clue to make reuse sustainable. It solved the problem with the SAGE experiment. Excess nutrients. It just resonated on every dimension, level, field. It resonated in every way. So I called the gentleman at the Smithsonian who invented it, Dr. Walter Adey. Hello, Walter, if you see this. And he referred me to his protege, Dr. Dean Callahan. And Dr. Dean Callahan was the kindest human being to me ever. I was still at that point living in that chaotic household, and I just delved into the problem. We would meet on video calls and just chew through the problem, how to apply this in Maui. That was 2015. In 2017, I started attending Maui Nui Marine Resource Council meetings. In 2018, I presented at Maui Nui Marine Resource Council at the Pacific Whale Foundation on turf scrubbers. And from that, I got a referral to the Maui Ocean Center to help them with their NPDES permit, which I did. Over 6 weeks, I pretty much managed the whole permit document, and I managed the development of what I understood and still understand to be the first flow diagram for the Maui Ocean Center, which directed animal waste into the triangle. It was never tasked to us to look at that UIC permit, and if someone were to be responsible for that, it would be the NPDES expert, a very prominent lady known here in Maui from Louisiana. And then I worked at the Maui Ocean Center, and stuff was weird. We weren't allowed to talk about where the pollution was going after it left the harbor. The basis of the NPDES permit was that it cleaned up the harbor. Well, I guess you could argue that, but that's not all to the story. I remember not being allowed to talk about where does the pollution go. Of course, the reef is not great there. And then there was other weird stuff. So the sampling of the effluent out of the Ocean Center for the NPDES permit is supposed to be what's called a grab sample. By definition, random. But this permit expert from Louisiana would allow her client to schedule and reschedule these ostensibly random samplings. And I picked up that they were timing their feeding because they wouldn't meet the specification if it was after the feeding. I don't remember how I ascertained that, but it was common knowledge. They were timing their sampling around the feeding because if they did it right after the feeding, they wouldn't meet the nutrient standard. I wrote an email about this, but this is a billionaire-owned corporation from a country in the Middle East that is very big in the news. Starts with an I. And I was actually scared to bring these things forward because of the energy of the environment. It seemed like they wanted a permit. They wanted to talk about the risks, the minimum possible. They wanted to reschedule their sampling, and I was new to the field. You couldn't ask machine learning interfaces at the time. I could have had Google, but it just was not the type of environment that seemed to encourage speaking up like that. I was not an expert. I won't say that I let it go. I certainly saved the draft email I sent protesting that, but it was just weird. And I wasn't in charge. I was given limited technical tasks. They told me I was principal engineer, but in some ways I almost feel like I got framed because later I found that in 2018, the general manager of that facility went off to make a UIC permit for the destination of that animal waste from the filter at the Triangle Wastewater Treatment Plant. And that operator tells me that they did not tell them that that effluent was going to that plant. I had no idea about that at the time. I was on the job. I was not included in discussions about that permit. In fact, us NPDES permit people were not even informed about that permit. That's significant. So I was actually let go at the end of 2019. Fine, I wasn't really given a reason. They didn't need my services anymore. But here's a weird thing. In 2018, they had a meeting for the Maʻalai Regional Wastewater Reclamation System project, the first meeting in October. And I was like, the A-team, I love it when a plan comes together. That is one of the main reasons I centered myself in this area. I want to be involved in that. Of course, I've been thinking about this since I came here in 2010. I got sick in those same waters. I had a very high interest in solving it. I came with bells on to that meeting in October of 2018. In fact, I helped that lady from Louisiana make her headlining presentation. I made a presentation too. I didn't have the boldness to ask to present it, but I made it. That's just where I was. The experiences I had kind of broke my self-confidence. So showed up in 2018 with bells on, put my name on the sign-up list, and those pieces of work never called me. They did proceed with the project though. They trained people like Stuart A. Holman from Wastewater and Alternatives and Innovations. buddy, 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 money, money, money. And they went off and tried to do stuff for 3 years. They did a feasibility report. That's it. 3 years. So in 2019, Kelly King invited me to testify for the Supreme Court hearings for the injection well case in Lahaina. And through that hearing, I first met the county council. Hi. Long video. And yeah, I met indirectly by being observed by someone from Born and Raised Earth, a philanthropic organization, bornandraisedearth.org. And they funded work to do flushaware.com. That's when I found that the wastewater entering the ocean in Kihei and Kahului, no disinfection step of any kind. Millions of gallons a day going into the ocean, raw, uncut pathogens. You can go to flushaware.com. We have a statewide data set. So in 2021, this adventure started to try to convince the county to disinfect the water. They have given me the runaround since then. Since the beginning, they say, we don't need your philanthropy. We got this. Don't you worry. It's right around the corner. They installed a 7 million gallon per day UV disinfection rig. Didn't have the plumbing to use it. Just this last budget season, I, like now, went hoarse, begging for even $1 to advance CBS 1169. Oh, and by the way, had the idea for Bill 52 over several years, testified many times and presented multiple times. Mayor Bisson signed that into law in 2024, but they kicked the deadline to 2039. So, and I've since worked with that same Dr. Callahan. I became a Sandia National Labs principal investigator, where we developed an attached algae solution for Ma'alaya. And now we have an attached algae solution for Lahaina, which has a very low total nitrogen limit. So I have that teed up. 3.5 years. So later, we're going to bring this full circle. I've been tormented by the childhood experience my whole life. Been watching stupid Netflix and YouTube Prime videos, and yeah, the science fiction-y version of that is not good. But in 2021, I found a researcher who wrote a book called Passport to the Cosmos. And by gosh, I put off reading that book for so long because I was afraid of what they would say about people that have had anomalous experiences like me. And I was so overjoyed to find it's not any particular demographic. These people are not psychotic. They're not. The one thing that all these people have is a form of PTSD, which I have in spades, ontological shock. And on September 29th, 2021, in one sitting, one day, I read that book and just breathed the hugest sigh of relief. It was written by the chair of psychiatry at Harvard. He said these people are not mentally ill, they're just traumatized. But here's what's beautiful. Something like half of the people that have these experiences come away with a clue, some sort of scientific clue, just like me. And apparently there are people across many industries that have had these anomalous experiences. They've been giving clues, many as children, and they have followed them to a T, and perhaps many fields have developed from these experiences. You're hearing me? It's real. It's significant. I think it's a neurobiological process in here that allows you to tap into ambient intelligence out there. It's not quote unquote this or that. It is part of the human experience. I think some people can access it more easily, but I believe everyone can. And boy, I had had a fall, and I was drinking to manage the pain, and in one day that ended, because at the core of it, I had been kicking myself for however long it was since 1984 that I was crazy. As so many people that have these experiences do, that's the ontological shock part, where it's like you got to integrate this experience. There's no reference point for it. And again, I'm also navigating with whatever my IQ is. And by the way, Not always a fun thing to have on board. I don't have the luxury of really forgetting or not noticing anything that's in my field of perception. So, first thing I did, I had this amazing data set of the condos in Matalaya. Called the person I worked with at the Ocean Center. Hey, got this thing flush aware. One of the weirdest things that's ever happened. He said, we have this project, the Matalaya Regional Wastewater Reclamation System project. He's like, you might want to be involved. What? First of all, we had talked about the turf scrubbers many, 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 many times. I had worked for him. I was at the first meeting. I was working with him while this project apparently was happening. And what is hard for me to process is A, they had to go out of their way for me to not know about it. I was working with them. And B, this person seemed to think that I forgot. I still to this day did not know what to make of it, but I went along with it. I said, oh yes, nice project you got there. They had not really made any progress. Feasibility report, 3 years. Working with Stuart Coleman from Y. And I joined the project, and a few months later we had a $250,000 grant. I mean, I worked my tail off. I would anticipate what they needed. I wrote another grant application for EPA. I worked closely with the county to get multi-million-dollar grants. And they would have these meetings for like 800 days down at the Sphere and not mention my name. So the same grant organization had been working with Maui Nui Marine Resource Council to keep a little bit of food on the plate for me with like a stipend. I'm disabled from this lymphedema working through the Ticket to Work program. There was an element of going back to work to help my mental health. Okay, that's going to be a joke here in a minute because what transpired is so bizarre. So this Y organization was accepting like 5-figure donations from vendors, and they were pushing one vendor like a very high pressure sales organization. And then they changed to another vendor. And weird stuff started happening where a contractor, ostensibly the lead engineer, would just not show up to meetings. Eco Solutions. We were getting these arguments. I said, I invited you to this meeting. He's like, well, you didn't send an invite. So I taught myself how to attach a digital invite. He said, well, it wasn't from invitation software. And then it got to the point where I was actually doing his work for him. This first design report. I wrote the whole thing with a lot of support, but that person never actually submitted a single report. And then it came time to invoice for it. And he, with a straight face, emphasis on the straight, invoice for my work. I was like, what is going on? It was surreal. And then that Stewart guy wrote an article about Bill 52 and all the progress in Matalaya. It had the word ingenious in the title and did not mention me. I mean, humorously inaccurate disinformation. And now I find he's affiliated with Omidyar, and eBay has that confirmed gang stalking thing. Omidyar's grandfather had a major role in founding the modern Iranian military and throwing out, get this, my previous landlord is a direct descendant of the Kahars, who were thrown out in the 1920s by the Pipi dynasty, which Omidyar's grandfather had facilitated through basically oil-funded mercenary work. You can't make this stuff up. And I know we're going on after more than 2 hours. I'm running out of battery here, but I will tie this up. Stuff got so weird. So, yeah, this Stuart Coleman character was like, we're going to have a seminar with our vendor. I was like, okay, this is getting ridiculous. I said, can you ask him if he has a financial incentive? Initially, apparently, he said verbally no, and then they asked him in writing. He said, yes, we have this preferred provider, tech provider program. He's like, they donate to us and we promote them. Like years and years and years after they had been pushing these providers. And by the way, some of them were the most expensive ones. And I said simply, hey, can you please disclose to the people attending this seminar that is part of our project ostensibly that you have a financial connection to these people? I did not know at the time that he was bringing home $125,000 a year salary and that these vendors were donating 5 figures, no less than 5 figures. And when I said, hey, can you please just disclose that this is not for fun, that, I mean, you're not exactly pay to play, but that there are large amounts of money being exchanged that's going pretty much to your salary. I was uninvited to the meeting for asking for a disclosure. And I was told, you don't know how Hawaii works. I was told ethics means something different to everyone. I said, that's not okay. Previously, I had heard perception is reality. Okay, did you catch what country of billionaire runs Coral World? It was so yuck. It was yuck. And by the way, I had taken a lovely tour of the Triangle Treatment Plant with all those genetic mutations and got sick as a dog after exposure to the sludge solids, which I don't know if you caught, was being sent to that plant without a permit. UM 1954 says that treatment plant only is allowed to have human waste, which is a much lower level of risk to someone like me. So I got sick as a dog basically the morning before the fire and have been sick ever since. Turns out they did not tell the operator that it had animal waste in it. He could not inform me, hey, this might be elevated risk. And yes, I made the flow diagram, but it never occurred to me it could be illegal. And as soon as I asked for that disclosure, which was never done, and by the way, this same outfit had been working with the Kihei Community Association, pushing the same vendors, never disclosed to them either. Whew. So suddenly, Eco Solutions no longer invited me to Greenbelt meetings. After 30 to 40 years of work on this, I was no longer invited. I was internally ostracized. That was hard because I don't know if you noticed, my gene, when something gets to me, it's an autoinflammation feedback loop on top of active infections. I mean, I was puking my guts out every morning for like over 6 months. It was hell on earth to be sick from after an illegal exposure, ask for a disclosure, told ethics means something different to everyone, and just pushed out. But I was persistent, and I was determined to finish this EPA grant application, convinced them to sign a placeholder to pay me a reasonable amount to develop this permit application, which I did over a year. And in February, March of 2025, after an EPA meeting, I said, hey, can I see that permit document for the triangle? He said, sure, here you go. And that's when I learned about the illegal discharge. And I was fretted and flustered. I said, these people are not really conducive to feedback. And indeed, they are not going to take this well. They're not going to take this well. And I respectfully went directly to the signatory, who is now the plaintiff in multiple lawsuits against me. And I disclosed respectfully, hey, your permit is not compliant. He knew nothing about it. He denied it. He called it inconsequential. He called in that lady from Louisiana. She's like, yeah, I told you about that. Can you send me that permit? She had never asked to see the other permit. They just sent the discharge off to another plant. She didn't ask to see the permit. Zero due diligence by that person. And that person has been going around, I've been told, saying, don't vote for me, because by the way, I ran for mayor. Did I say that part? The corruption was so profound, I decided I had to up my game. So I told them, hey, you got a permit. I think you have a permit violation here. One day they reported it to DOH, told me it was inconsequential. The next day, after I disclosed it to the first person not directly involved, fired by text. The pretenses were insubordination because I didn't submit a contract that had an error in it and asked for them to rewrite it. Another insubordination to them is to refuse to put someone's name on an EPA grant when they have an active permit violation. I mean, it was all bogus, and they brought in the same law firm, another iteration, direct descendant, Dentons. These are the people that had set up algae systems and been instrumental in denying us health care. Scary ass law firm. My life became a living hell because, again, I'm sick still, and I started having so much stress that my lips started twitching, which is one of the side effects of that medication. And so I had to go on a guided taper, and it was hell. It was hell. I was sick, didn't know why, didn't know about my mutations. I had got some blood work that said my immune system was shot, didn't understand that. And then the lawsuits started coming because they were just, oh my gosh, it's so much better. We had started a nonprofit. I was executive director, founding board member, secretary, treasurer, had an Instagram. And after they fired me, they started a bogus Instagram and started making promotional videos without even telling me. I mean, it was absurd. These people were mean-spirited and malicious. That's my perception. And I'm like off my head in terms of my stress levels, withdrawing from this very strong medication in a controlled manner. And then I was told I was being removed from that nonprofit after finding out that indeed they had lied to me. It was not inconsequential. I found out that they had reported it to DOH, the violation, the day before they fired me. So messed up. And so I was like, I'm not letting this stand because, not because of me, but because I think they're harming the reef. And I was still thinking, like, this guy has lost his mind. I had seen his wife in the parking lot of the bank when we were opening the nonprofit account. I was like, he's lost his mind. I need to intervene and warn him. You're an immigrant. You are placing yourself at risk. The ICE stuff had just started. I was genuinely concerned that he had lost his mind, and conceived an idea that I could send a strongly worded email to say, hey, don't do that. I don't want you to get picked up. You're scaring me, bud. My digital assistant drafted an email, which I then scheduled and rescanned. And the same digital assistant said, I'd asked for something legal and ethical. And they're like, that's not legal and ethical. That'll get you in trouble. I said, okay, well, let's cancel that. Canceled it. Double checked it. Triple checked it. My heart was pounding because of what I was told was legal and ethical and wasn't. I was the first person to absolutely freak out about how terrible that email was. I was shooketh. I was like, how could it tell me that that is legal and ethical? Again, I'm really sick. In the middle of this, all these memories are resurfacing from my minor abuse, which I'm reporting to the school in the middle of all this. And it turns out the email went out even though I definitively canceled it. And I have traced the malfunction of my computer back to a virus or something that was in the news from a staff of member Tom Cook. And I have an active police report to investigate that. I don't know if anyone has watched the news on the police here recently, but yeah. Turns out the criminal intelligence unit was specializing in criminal intelligence. Like the opposite of regulating it. So I don't even know what to say except that I finally got in with infectious disease on my 50th. Let me get this right. The first service for the many lawsuits around the email I didn't send went out on my 50th birthday. And I eventually picked up the service papers because I was pretty much homebound. I was so sick on the day that I first went to the infectious disease expert. And that was around August of 2025. And by November, I was making posts on Facebook to asking people to pray for me. I was so sick. I was having to navigate the court system for something that I did not choose to do with words that I did not write. And the judge, I don't know if it's a good idea to talk about judges. I mean, I really respect this person, but she said to me, I will not approve your subpoena to Gmail. I believe you did it. I will not simply ask the computer if you did it. I don't know what to say to that. And then in a later case, I was told, you're making too many filings. You need to read the vexatious litigant stuff. I've never sued anyone. I'm only a defendant. And I was warned that I cannot make a filing without running it across opposing counsel. I've been terrified to make a filing since then. As I said in the TRO hearing, because apparently they say I'm going to come down and beat people up. There's no basis for that. And I said, I don't really have any interest in going near this person. I'd never indicated that I would. So it's okay if you give this. It doesn't bother me, but it's didn't send that message. And all you have to do is ask Gmail. They'll tell you I didn't. They refused. So I've been hacked. I've gone to so many agencies, and this narrative has been put out. Again, notice the disinformation from the articles. There were also other events where that same person from Y would do like a rally for the reefs, mention everyone else but me. So putting this all together, it appears I have been targeted with some sort of structured smear campaign that was actually already in the works before I uncovered the permit violation, became supercharged after I found the permit violation. And by the way, since then I found that the Malaya Harbor built a new plant in 2012, never even applied for permits. The same operator is importing sludge down there improperly. The condos have not been monitored since 1997 to something like 2007. Absolute chaos. The reef is gone. It went below 2% in 2010 in Malaya. I still have a defamation suit on the basis that I harmed this person's business. And this person, I have documentation that they tried to sell the entire triangle and did not tell the person that they had an active permit violation. Again, the same person did not tell the operator, hey, we're sending animal waste over there. It's high risk. And oh, by the way, they're using chlorine disinfection at the triangle, which doesn't cover a whole class of pathogens called non-tuberculosis mycobacteria that's in almost every aquarium and aquaculture operation. And so I'm telling you this because if you assemble all these clues together, it is quite a scary story. And there's more to it, which is that I became a Sandia National Labs principal investigator along the way, which gave me a certain level of access to Sandia National Labs, called an email address. And I don't know if anyone caught that our current president sent out a social media post talking about wiping out a civilization. I was not okay with that. My in-laws are in Iran, and I acted. I sent an email that advised them in the form of humor 3 things why it makes absolutely no sense to do a nuclear first strike. I said 25th Amendment. I said Epstein files plus 25th Amendment. And I said, by the way, paraphrasing, this is a test of your organization. I think they all understand that deterrence is right there in the name. And indeed, it is in the news that the command was given to wipe out civilization, and that the generals basically said no. Voices were raised, a general stormed out, and the command to wipe out a civilization with thermonuclear or nuclear devices was declined later that same day. And I actually developed that relationship by bringing the Limu into the county council to bait them. And they took the bait. Limu collected under the direction of Skippy Howe and Delia Nar. Didn't sell them the Limu. Not mine to sell. And that Limu may be going out to solve the wastewater problem and is connected to the solution in Lahaina to the nutrient daily limit. So all this weaves together into a story with such low probability that it's effectively zero probability. This is a divine story. I haven't even mentioned the part where I ran for mayor and got 240 votes. And a set of 12 laws came through me. livingmaui.org/legislation. You can see the receipts on my education on livingmaui.org/diligence. You can hear me talk, livingmaui.org/events. And one of those bills, the NANI Act, Ecosystems Rights, has the power to send the bill to restore the reef in Maalaea to the agencies that should have prevented it and the people that did it. Because I believe that NTM pathogen pathway, which is not moderated by chlorine in the triangle, may actually be behind a major component of reef collapse. And here I am. We just had a hurricane. I just talked for like 2.5 hours. There's more where that came from. That was like the succinct version. But there's a thread through this, which is that disinfection is not happening. Permit compliance is not happening. People are getting sick. Reefs are collapsing. They're talking about rezoning the condos in Maalaea, and that's not okay. Some lady who lives down there testified about having cancer, which can be increased in probability from infections, even those that may or may not be detected. And it is a perfect storm of doo-doo. And all I can say is, ever since I sent that email and the command to deploy nuclear devices was declined, my life has taken a very, very unusual turn. I can't rule out that this is my timeline. I can't rule out that email did not work. And by gosh, I think it's a beautiful story. I have revealed some things that are maybe sensational in the news, the experiencer phenomenon, and I haven't even mentioned the Gabbards and their central role to this, and how I actually met Mike Gabbard. He was largely behind the movement for the Defense of Marriage Act, and I forgave him, and we worked together on the NANI Act. And it turns out the person Stuart Coleman is in with those people. The cult leader that Tulsi was not a member of, she was born into. Their whole thing is hating gay people and Arabs. You think they like my hot husband, Jake? No, they did not. And like Little Miss Attribution, Stuart Coleman is just a flat liar. And what makes me sad is that they have entrained people such as the long-haired gentleman who is the Green candidate for state representative in Lahaina. He appeared in one of those videos for the Renegade Instagram, for the nonprofit I founded. Archie Kalepa, he is central in the article that talked about my near 6 years of parallel work in separate timelines. He states he would like to learn more about this stuff, but it appears Little Miss Stuart A. Holman has been going around as something like an anti-PR agent. I don't even know what to make of that. Except I will say, if you work with people from the continental United States of America, you might want to check if they're from east of the Mississippi. Just a public ethical Google. Are they from north or south of the Mason-Dixon line? You might want to pay attention to that stuff. But yeah, I don't even know how to tie that together, except that I have been on here for almost 2.5 hours. So if you have listened to this whole thing, you're probably a lawyer. And I bet you just made $1,000, so congratulations. But all I can say is, I think a lot of people had banked on me not being alive. And I have had strange behavior from a lot of people that are peripherally connected to this dynamic. And I really don't want you to miss the part that the harbor is not permitted. All the major marine resource organizations, Pacific Whale Foundation, operate out of that harbor. And what I think I have experienced is exactly in the wheelhouse of eBay people, Omidyar people. I sound like a paranoid person, but if even Kelly King can turn her back on me, then that is a very effective disinformation campaign. And yes, out of control autoinflammation feedback loop. Ooh, I can hardly say it. Out of control autoinflammation feedback loop looks a lot like mental illness, but it just isn't. It is distressing, but it's not that. And I have gotten that under control. And I hope you all catch that this has been, I'm on my 43rd year since that dream. It was a real experience. It was a transpersonal experience. It is a known and studied neurobiological status. I'm not saying there aren't external elements of so-called intelligence, but it is above all, basically, I am a medical grade visionary to the point that it's almost problematic, and I am just beginning my work because we started chiaction.org. We're going to find a way to fund all of the upgrades through philanthropy, including Ma'alaya, including municipal wastewater disinfection, including cesspool upgrades, and we're not going to septic tanks alone. We're going to have a whole bunch of bioreactor gardens. And if you want to know about the community scale wastewater solution, well, I have over 7,000 files on my computer. And one of them is the 5 to 10 bullet points that Y apparently thinks is sufficient for a $1,000 consultation contract. So corrupt. It's all so corrupt. It may be legal, but yeah, do not miss the thread of the Gabbards, D&I, and what is happening in the Middle East as connects to the parent company, which are associated with a certain dynamic that starts with a Z, and the Omidyars, whose grandfather started the modern Persian military in a way that was to throw out the rightful royals, and they're associated with civil beat that comes for astute Hawaiians like Kai Kahele left and right and that TV show. And what I'm telling you is that this is all connected. I do not understand how it is connected, but I know that I witnessed some sort of exchange that has some sort of significance to it. And if that significance had an end goal of deploying nuclear devices, well, nice try. Let's call it an end run. And, I may just have imparted on the people who make these decisions, like, yeah, don't embarrass yourself. Or I might have actually gummed up the AI that probably runs those systems to the point that they wouldn't function. And that is exactly what I set out to do. If you have ever seen the movie War Games, well, I'm a big fan. And here's my final clue. So we know about the Gabbards and Russia and the cult, blah, blah, blah. Here is my final statement, Your Honor. There was a recent panel at the Haiku Community Center for mayor. There was a gentleman in the back, a lawyer, a bald lawyer, yelling at a lawyer, looking at a laptop. And while the other gentlemen mayoral candidates were over talking, I took my little printouts of Auntie Nani's face, don't miss the holy water part, and I peeked over his shoulder. I looked on that laptop, and there were only 2 words that I can make up on that laptop, a lawyer yelling to a lawyer about filings. And this is what I will leave you with, is that the 2 words that I was able to make out on that laptop, oh, there is a beautiful, did you see that dragonfly? Whew. The 2 words that I can make out on that laptop here is I've been talking for 2 hours and exactly 30 minutes, 23, my lucky number. The 2 words that I could make out on that laptop of that lawyer yelling at a lawyer about a filing were the following. Russian embassy. So there you have it, folks. I think I'm a pretty good spy. What do you think? Because when I was talking to Gabbard, he said I would love to introduce the Nani Act. He looked up at us. He was like, I don't support it 100%. I support it 1,000%. But I can't introduce it. I said, why, sir? As someone who has lost a partner to DOMA, talking to the person who may have been behind it largely. He said, I can't because of my daughter. He said, no one will say aloha to me in the halls of the legislature anymore. I said, well, that checks out. I didn't say that. But yeah, turns out Carol Gabbard is from Decatur, Indiana. A couple trailer parks over from my family. So all I can say is, you know, people from the Midwest, they do like their Armageddon stuff, but, you know, choose your East Central Indiana backward areas wisely, because Decatur, it means male cat. And we'll just do some free word association with what I know about Decatur. I already said that the Russian thing was my closing thought, but we're going to do this. Hoarding, lawn ornaments, genetic concentration, and cults. So that is my closing thought. I went over 2.5 hours. Apologies. Have a wonderful day. Aloha. And you can email me at travis@livingmaui.org. Because we live here. The Aina is alive. She is a sentient being. She is an auntie. She will smack you upside the head. And yeah, we want to live. So that is the basis for my campaign, which is to just completely obliterate the false narratives that have been out there about me in a structured way, in the very same format as the $56 million suit that was just settled with eBay executives for gang stalking someone that gave them a bad review online. So there you have it, folks. TraviePoo, there's more to me than you thought. And if you got through this, well, you might want to drink some water. Have a lovely day. I'm going to go drink some water too. God loves you.